r/AskReddit. Parents who have disowned or genuinely stopped loving your child. What happened? Alright, so this is a family secret that I revealed and got my mother's family to disown me, which honestly is for the better. When I was a kid, my uncle molested me repeatedly over a summer I was with my grandparents. It really fucked with my sexuality and took me into my late teens, early 20s and years of therapy to accept that I'm gay. Still working on trying to even trust men as whole, in part because of this. Anyway, when I was about 14 I told my mother, because I just needed to get the secret out. I was in a situation I'd have to be alone with him again, and I was scared. Although looking back I was more scared trying to tell her what her youngest brother did. When I did I learned that this is a pretty common thing in her family, and it happened to her by my grandmother's second husband. Well, it happened to her and her 3 other sisters. My mother apologized to me, telling me she was sorry for sending me away that summer, and that the family curse caught me as well. Honestly, I needed to hear this, because I hated her for letting this happen, but she had no way of stopping it, or even knowing it had happened to her son. Always been something that happened to the girls, but never the boys. Aren't family traditions grand? Sarcasm. We went to the cops, and because it had been so long, and across state lines, there wasn't much they could do. It was my word against his. My mother family acknowledged that stuff like this happens in their family, and that I should blame the devil for this happening to me, and not the person. And really I should feel bad for him, because all of this was hard on him as well. He took this time to officially come out of the closet, and they all, minus my mother, let him know how brave he is for admitting his illness, and subsequently blamed me for turning him gay. Keep in mind I was still trying to process if I was gay at this time. I was then accused of wanting to get molested, and that I needed to repent what I had done, and for trying to destroy his life. My mother tried to argue back, but at this point it was my mother's family versus my mother and I. My mother ended up giving slightly and told them we need time to process this. They let off and we got the hell out of there and never looked back. It's been about 10 years since I saw any of them. They blame my mother for raising a devil-loving son, which didn't get helped when I finally came out. The last thing they told us is that they'll let both my mother and I back in, if and only if I admit that a 9-year-old wanted to be molested, and of course convert back to being straight. I think they are still surprised I haven't taken them up on their offer. IDK and ITC. My family is super small now, and I couldn't be more pleased. I can answer for my mother. I cut contact from her, but from what I hear nowadays she hates me for ruining her life. First awful thing I did, my mother purchased her first home when I was 12. She had always had this vision of me having a house and playing in the backyard as a child, and I think she felt like I was missing out by living in apartments all my life. Thing was, I had no desire to move out of where we were, and probably more importantly, she couldn't really afford a house, plus this was just around the housing crisis as well, so the price was super inflated and dropped significantly a year later. We only lived there a year before moving in with her at the time boyfriend and renting it out. I apparently was the sole reason that she purchased that house. She did that for me. So it was my fault that she bought a house she couldn't afford. Second awful thing I did, she got pulled over while driving to a nearby city because she was swerving on the freeway. I was 13 at the time and had fallen asleep, but got woken up by the car shaking back and forth and almost hitting a semi while she was asleep at the wheel. I woke her up and she insisted on pushing through, and not too long after she was pulled over by an undercover cop. I watched as she was failing the sobriety test hard. She fell a couple of times trying to walk in a straight line. I cooperated with police and gave over the prescriptions she had in the car with her. So basically that was an act of betrayal. She was in the medical field and was struggling to find/keep a job that would hire her with a record, charged with child endangerment. So she was driving while heavily medicated, but I took most of the blame because I wasn't loyal to her and sold her out to the police. So now her finances are in shambles and can't keep a job in her field because of the awful things I did as a teenager. Her career is ruined because of me. A lot more happened to damage our relationship, but I think she would identify these two things as the main reasons. Having me as a child ruined her life. I have technically, I guess, disowned one of my siblings. Older sister, 4 years older, who created more trauma and grief for me growing up than anyone has fully realized, as I was never able to fully explain or voice it. We are part of a big family, and I remember turning about 9 or 10 years old, and it appeared she suddenly had such an overpast destined for me. She was vaguely sisterly beforehand, I can briefly remember. But past the age of 9/10, she just appeared to despise me. Absolutely hate me. The only thing I can think of as a cause looking back now all those years later is either she had a strange jealousy of my closeness to our father, or perhaps it was a simple case of her being angry/unhappy of our parents' divorce, and I was weak and quiet and an absolutely easy target. It started off small, just her being short with me, possibly normal behavior for a girl transitioning into her teens. But it slowly got vicious, whereby she'd purposely wind me up to the point of tears and grin quietly when I got so upset, and would lie with absolute ease about it. I was so shit at voicing myself that I'd get upset then give up so my mom wouldn't really pursue it. Also by that point she seemed to be getting very good at being aggressively manipulative. I remember once we had a small argument, nobody knows about this, and she was sitting down at the top of the stairs at the time. I remember she said hurtful shit to me, and I was very young, and I went to walk down the stairs to cool off, and I distinctly remember her glaring at me, then sticking her leg out just as I passed, and I flew down those stairs. How I only ended up with a little mark I have no idea. I remember her panicking and comforting me whilst telling me not to tell our parents. Of course I didn't. It started increasing then as I got into my early teens. Just general mocking me silently and sneakily so that my parents wouldn't notice. Would laugh at the way I dressed. I went through a goth phase lol. So many fucking lies about me, and I just never understood. And then when things got really bad with our parents' divorce I internalized massively. I started to secretly self-harm, not anymore of course, when I was 13. By aged 14 my older sister noticed. Perhaps that could have been an opportunity for comfort and advice and safety. She laughed at me, told me I wasn't as ill as she was, and for me to cut deeper next time. I remember truly feeling alone and desolate by that point. Not only was I getting mercilessly bullied at school for that, and for all other reasons, but home was no longer safe either. Then me and my mother had an argument and my mom told me to leave when I was 16. She says she regrets this now. We are much better these days and I've never stopped loving my mother. Anyway, my older sister surprised me the day I was thrown out. I was crying OFC and she actually comforted me. I remember being so confused by that lol. She said not to worry, just leave as our mother had said, etc. It was oddly nice and alien to have that. A few days later our older brother calls me shocked to hear I've been thrown out. He asked why. I explained we had an argument and she threw me out, simple as. He then called me back angry, telling me that's not what really happened. BC he talked to my older sister, who was there comforting me at the time, and she said otherwise. And long story short, that started an argument with my older brother and I. We haven't been right since. Speaking of, I've watched his older sister has brought my older brother to tears. She once even accused us both, I was around 14 at the time, of having an inappropriate relationship because we were close. Fucking disgusting. Over the years, I'm 26 now, she has does a list of small painful things to me, directly at me, about me. The things I've had to find out that she's spread about me to dumb bed down family members who buy into her bullshit. The hell it's brought me, the isolation, the loneliness, the anger, the injustice. Nobody believed me, and she fucking got away with it. She did once tell me, when I was a teen, that I'd amount to nothing and never get a job. I'm halfway through my postgrad with a good job in therapy and she's been unemployed for 10 years living at home whilst I live with my partner. Speaking of, she even tried it with my boyfriend. tried antagonizing him, but unlike her, he's direct and basically told her to fuck off. Lol. Of course she ran him down to the idiots who'll believe her every word. Man, I legit do not have the word count to explain the details of every cruel personal vindictive thing she has done to me. Hacking into my FB account and posting shit about me. Things like that. And nobody ever stood up and told her to fucking stop. Just stop. When I needed mental health support, I was absolutely utterly alone, young and vulnerable. Now I'm older and I work with vulnerable children. I can't believe I'm still here. She rubbed salt in my wounds and smiled and got fucking away with it too. I don't know how she has no guilt, none at all. How could she? I was a kid. A self-harming loner kid who got bullied the F out of and struggled in school. I remember through all the rubbish going on, I landed myself into some boy trouble, and once again, she mocked me for it. Laughed at me. But when she laughed, after she discovered I had been cutting myself, well, I still can't understand that one. She didn't know I'd been hiding it for a year or so by that point. She just found it hilarious. I can't bear going into the house I once grew up in knowing she's there lingering about. She's not just been this way to me, however. I firmly believe to this day she directed the majority of it to me, yes. However, I'm very sure the more I study psychology and the more I work firsthand with personality and mood disorders, that amongst the genuine illnesses she absolutely has a form of a personality disorder too. I've seen her do things to others too. Most people around her simply excuse all of this behavior with a she's not well, bless her. I was fucking unwell at one stage in my life and I wouldn't have dreamed treating others like that. And yet I still got kicked out. Lol, I genuinely haven't thought about her or her bullshit bullying in so long. I'm so far away from it now and so freed. Your question got me riled up, lol. To anyone else out there who's had to cut poison out of your life, it may suck at first, but God, you heal so much quicker from it. I've never said out loud how deeply she affected me, how much I carried it all with me, how for so long I truly allowed her to infect me and burrow into my skin. How she turned so many of my uncles, aunties, my own grandmother against me, and all for what? Power control. One thing I can say is it nearly broke me. I've had many wobbles since, but now I have started to truly appreciate life more than ever and be grateful I'm still here and thankful for my other siblings who have good, true hearts, who I adore with all of my heart. I'm sorry for her in some ways, sure, but my sympathies don't stretch that far when she almost truly broke me and I was a fucking child. Shame on her. Others may never find out and that's fine, I don't need them to. I know what truly happened, and so does she. In fact, despite not talking to her now for only a few years, I know she's in the past sent me strange messages via Reddit. She made such an effort to burrow under my skin that she used to look for my diaries when I was younger. I was so lonely and confused and hurt that I'd pour my heart out in my diaries. Anything from how I felt about myself and hatred or even confusion such as sexuality or whatever. Anything that popped into my head, I thought I finally found a safe release. Nope. She would snoop, read my most intimate thoughts, then announce it to me and laugh and mock me and crush me further. I also remember writing how I totally thought I was bisexual, simply young hormonal confusions. However, she of course found that and read it. One evening, me, her, and my mother were watching TV, and I always remember this. She looked directly at me, smiled, then looked at my mother and said, "Hey, did you know Lollipop is bisexual?" And just watched as I squirmed and as my mother looked dumbfounded considering I was approximate 13. I hated her so badly for that. It was the smirking and smiling. Christ, I'd better stop now, otherwise I'll carry on all night. I have kept an awful lot of this in. Oddly enough, I truly barely think about all this or think about her much anymore, as I know she has no power anymore. However, it's interesting to think these things. It does remind me I've come a long way on my own. All she has against me is just angry words to gossip with others, I guess. That's it now. Hey, you might even be reading this right now. If so, why? What else is there left for you to gain now? Aren't you done already? I disowned my father. I don't believe that it nearly as difficult a decision as disowning a child, but it was tough. I grew up in an upper middle class perfect nuclear family. My parents were high school sweethearts. My dad was an operator at an oil refinery. My mom was an accountant turned stay-at-home mom. I'm a middle child. I have a 3-year older brother and a 3-year younger brother. When my older brother was about 10, my dad's drinking got out of hand and he became extremely physically abusive. A few years later, my mom divorced him after 23 years of marriage because she was afraid for our lives. My dad went off the deep end, started doing drugs, stealing, etc. Was involved in a few hit and runs. My older brother, who had received the brunt of the physical abuse, was manipulated into a relationship with my dad for a few years. To a lesser extent, so was I. He seemed to take an interest in us for the first time since we were little, but in hindsight it was just more manipulation and gaslighting. Won't go into all of the details, but my brothers and I eventually got wind of just what kind of sketchy stuff he was involved in. My little brother and I, who both had aspirations to get into law enforcement, cut him out of our lives completely. My older brother took a while longer. He was a kid who always just wanted his dad to love him, and so he was wearing blinders. He did eventually see the light and cut my dad out as well. A few years ago, my dad was living with his mom. My grandma had been manipulated by him for years, and they had a symbiotic codependent relationship. She was a prescription addict, and he was an everything addict. My grandma had a reverse mortgage on her home. She was diagnosed with lung cancer and given 6 months to live and moved into a nursing home. My dad kept squatting at her house, despite the bank coming to, rightfully, claim the home. Cops got involved, and he was arrested. My grandma slipped and fell 2 days after moving to the nursing home. She developed a brain bleed and died a few days later. My dad had a seizure his first night in jail and was brought to the hospital, where it was determined he had a burst brain aneurysm. The doctors theorized that the aneurysm was the result of his drug use, and when he was scuffling with the cops during the arrest, his increased blood pressure and/or jarring caused it to burst. He's now in a nursing home and functioning at about a 6-year-old's level. He has some inkling that he's fucked up royally and it is all his fault, but he really doesn't understand the specifics. He can kind of communicate and hold conversations, but they're bizarre and wander all over, and a lot of very strange words make their way in. I visit him a few times per year. I only do it because the person he became with addiction is dead. I believe that karma caught up to him, and he's earned his hell. I truly would not shed a tear if he dropped dead tomorrow. He's been dead to me for a decade. I do have some compassion for a sad, confused 58-year-old man who is alone in a depressing nursing home with no visitors. He knows he has kids and a wife. He doesn't understand they're divorced, and sometimes he even knows he has grandkids he has never been allowed to meet. So he doesn't understand why nobody visits him. I've started occasional visits not because I have any interest in having a relationship with him, but because unfortunately the doctors saved him when his aneurysm burst, and we are left with a person who is paying for crimes he doesn't know he committed in a world he doesn't understand. He sometimes cries when he asks to see pictures of that little boy, my nephew, his grandson, and I have to explain, yet again, why he isn't allowed to meet him. He asks me questions about that cop, my little brother, whose name he can't remember. He looks so proud when I tell him that his son is rising through the ranks and just became a K9 officer. It's like a shard of the dad he was 25 years ago has surfaced, and everything in between only exists as a convoluted fever dream. It tears my heart open as a human to see his suffering, but in a really twisted, sick way gives me satisfaction that his actions caught up to him, which makes me hate myself even more than I already did. I doubt anyone has read this. It wasn't supposed to be a novel, but that's how I disowned my dad, then kind of developed a minimal relationship with the ghost of his former humanity that now occupies his body. My heart goes out to people who have had to disown a child. I was extremely fortunate to have an incredible mom and extended family to support my brothers and me, yet I'm still damaged from my time with him. Having to choose between compassion and love for a flawed person and your own or your other loved one's physical and mental well-being rips something open inside of you and leaves you permanently scarred. I'm not a parent. I've never disowned a child. My parents disowned my oldest sister. I'm the youngest of 3 girls. My oldest sister had a horrible relationship with my father, blames me for getting in the way of their relationship. She had her first baby, to spite him, when she was 16 years old. My father refused to give her money because she met a deadbeat child predator and got pregnant again and again. She constantly put herself and deadbeat before kids. Dad would send money to girls for Christmas and birthdays and never heard a thing. He finally gave up. She's 30, has 6 daughters, and lives in a mobile home in North Carolina. We hadn't seen or heard from my sister until June of this year. My oldest niece contacted me asking to come to Florida, where I live, for the summer to get her and her sisters out of the trailer. I agree, contact sister and she agrees. I set up plane tickets and organize the rooms they'll stay in. When they got here, they were completely disheveled. Clothes visibly dirty, smelled foul, so covered in lice that my white towel stained grey from removing them. My niece informed me that they had been without water and electricity for 6 months. They live in a 2-bedroom mobile home. There are holes in the roof, bugs, and rats everywhere. As a family, we decide the girls aren't going back to North Carolina. We tell my sister to come to my parents' house in Florida to get a life together and get back on her feet. She refused because deadbeat is not invited. Ironically, she found out that deadbeat is cheating on her. She confronts him and he kicks her out of shithole trailer. Deadbeat said, I would rather be homeless than live with you. Sister now works for the dollar store and doesn't pull her weight with kids. At least the girls are safe now. Edit. I never really finished my point with the story. My parents had disowned my oldest sister when she moved to North Carolina with deadbeat for 6 years until my niece reached out to me through Facebook. I had never even met my 2 youngest nieces until this event. I regret turning my back on my sister. I really hate her and what she put her babies through, but if we stayed in her life for those 6 years we maybe could have prevented this. Not my kid, but my sister I raised for several years. I was a senior in HS when my parents had my sister, completely unexpected. They were 58 and 55. I never really got to know her much as I went away to college when she was 5 months old and was in the Air Force by the time she was 1 1/2. I saw her twice on leave and got pics, but the way life was working out we never really got time together. Fast forward, our dad dies when she is 2 and my stepmother is raising her. She was a terrible parent, like the kind that saw one of her kids run away at 16 to halfway across the country, another run away at 15 and get married, and one that is just a loon who spent his life bouncing around whatever hot MLM program was out there as a career. She also convinced my dad to send me to a Pray Away the Gay camp in TN when I was 15. So when my sister was 11 and begging for help, I took leave and went to her. Surprisingly, my stepmonster was happy to get attorneys to draw up the paperwork for me to become my sister's guardian and even pay for it. So I'm raising my sister and things are okay until she is about 14. Then I caught her doing these videos online talking dirty trying to get guys to jerk off. So that was a mess of trying to get those down and suing the people that hired her to do them. Ran away for a week, hiding out at a friend's house, found her when she was caught shoplifting, a B&E charge at 14, trying to steal the phone of a boy she was dating to SE if he was talking to other girls. It happened on base, and I managed to talk it out of being a bigger thing. A second B&E charge with friends breaking into the NCO club to try to steal beer. I was told I had to leave base housing at that point. My security clearance was suspended to make sure she wasn't putting me in a position I could be compromised. Still 14. Arrested with a stolen military ID trying to get into a bar. 15 escapes rehab. 15 escapes rehab against 16. Things seem good, and she is taking school seriously. At 18 she was accepted to our ISD, graduated with honors, and had an actual decent paying job with a web company with benefits and everything. Started getting stoned a lot, lost her job, sold her car to pay bills, lost her apartment, still hadn't bothered looking for work. Got her trust fund at 24, blew over $400k in 2 years, nothing to show for it. Had multiple cases against her for drugs. Was restricted to the state, but decides to go follow fish around anyway and sell molly. Got picked up for hooking and possession out of state, was returned to where she was detained, and somehow released pending trial yet again. While awaiting trial she was caught holding enough packaged for sale heroin to qualify as a distribution charge point. By then, I hadn't heard from her for almost 7 years, and only managed to keep up with her reading the police blotter, or from an occasional attorney, that she had contacted me to verify I would pick up her legal tab. I wouldn't. Against any logic, she was out of prison in under 3 years. I heard she doomed a bunch of people out to make it happen. She showed up at my house, asking for a place to stay. I said I couldn't have her in my house, but I'd get her a place for the night and then help her locate a place of her own. That night she broke into my house, nearly got shot by me while doing it, and tried to spin some story that she was looking for something she dropped in my house earlier that day, despite never actually entering my house. I told her she had to go. She threatened she would call DCFS and tell them I was abusing my kids if I didn't go with her to an ATM and give her all the money I could withdraw. Told her to GTFO before I exercised the castle defense law and dropped her. Took out a restraining order the next day, and in doing so found she once again left state when she wasn't supposed to have, and violated her parole. So back to the clink. Since then she's been dead to me. I was a kid and my sister was much older when my parents were finally done with her. From my recollection, she went through the cycle of making one stupid decision after another, even when they would tell her and show her why she shouldn't make that decision. Dropped out of college they were paying for and used the tuition money she was refunded to buy a Firebird, then quit her job, let car run out of oil, kept driving it until the engine seized up. Parents bailed her out again, buying her what they could afford on one salary, a decent, used station wagon. Only catch, she take the job my dad called in favors for. Parents come home one day to find strange car in driveway, a Sunbird. It was old and shitty, but it was the one trade my sister managed to swing on the station wagon. Lo and behold, old and shitty car breaks down almost immediately, and she simply stops showing up to work, gets fired, moves out with no car and no job, accusing parents of controlling her life. Moves back in 3 months later. Upset that I have moved into her old bedroom, which is bigger, demands to be moved back into the bigger bedroom. Parents say no, she threatens to move out. She goes on a semi-hunger strike about the bedroom. Turns out she was shoplifting and stockpiling candy to eat, so she wouldn't have to eat with the rest of the family. During this time, dates a number of less than stellar boyfriends, including a guy who is 30 years older, but drives a Porsche, a guy who had been convicted of sexual abuse, and another guy who generally creeps everyone out by jumping the fence and just standing in the backyard at all hours of the night. Eventually, she is told to pay rent, go to college, or move out. She chooses to move out, and is gone by the end of the week. I clearly remember her threatening to burn the house down as she left. 2 months later, she asks to move back in, because her roommate and best friend kicked her out. Parents say no, she's on her own, unless she wants to go to college, or get a job and keep it. Car breaks down again, for good, and calls and asks parents if they can buy a new one for her. Not new as in new to her. New as in brand new model year. My parents' newest car was 15 years old at the time. They say no, and not to call again. There were a whole raft of other things too, including forgetting to pick up her grandmother from doctor's appointments, generally loathing the existence of the rest of her family, and then, ironically, deriding the family as rednecks when she finally managed to hook a guy who was a small business owner and actually had some money. Anywho, it's been about 20 years since I've spoken to her, and From the stuff I hear now and again through the pipeline, I'm better for it. I do expect her to come calling when my parents pass and she finds out I'm the sole heir. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Please leave a like and subscribe.